Okay, so you handed out the amendment, what is it, 1007? All right, as we knew, Senator Perkins Quokka would not be able to attend right away, but we can do some preliminary stuff. Um, I want you guys to understand that the goal of this is to get you close enough that you can sign your own agreement. Okay. Um, that Senator Perkins Quokka and I will be the two that decide what is going to be presented back to the whole Senate committee on the two alternatives. But what I'm trying to do is get you close enough that you will be able to sign your own agreement. You will never have to come back here again. If you decide to change this or change that or change the other thing, as long as you have an agreement. And that's per the paragraph that we put in here, 52 1B or whatever it is, and then also the stuff that's in chapter 53 that allows you to do those kind of agreements. And we'll give you our blessing and send you off. But that is the intent, is that, we'll get you started, get an agreement in here, get you under chapter 52, so that you can do it. Now, I don't know who your letter or email from yesterday, I don't know who it went to, whether it went to the people in DRA and whether it went just. Okay. Yeah, if Trish, if you'd make copies of that so that, all right, some of the things that Woodsville wanted were communicated to Senator Perkins Quokka, and part of that was put into this draft. Parts were intentionally left out of the draft. If you have trouble finding it, I'll find it on my phone. And yeah, let me. Okay. So with the Woodsville stuff, certainly the first draft that I had written of the amendment didn't have some things in it about various ways to share the information and or to distribute the amount of money. And one of the things that I did talk to Senator Perkins Quokka about is that for some of that, like construction projects on roads, that's certainly an issue, but I look at it this way. If I give you construction money on the roads and I only pay you per mile, for the other, that's fine. If I go back and look at the agreement from 2019 and I say, okay, we're going to give you money based on the assessed value, which is going to at least double, if not a little more, the amount of money that you were to get, then I wouldn't be also giving you, money for construction or other things. I mean, it's not, I am not trying to side with one side against the other or the other way around. I'm trying to find that middle ground that'll get you there, okay? Some of the things that are in this email, okay, where we're just going to base it on the roads. Well, if I only base it on the roads, then I think I do need to consider, if you're having a big paving project or whatever. And Senator Perkins Quokka and I had a conversation about looking back, because the way I wrote this, we only look forward. Okay. And so the reason I gave her for not looking back is between 19 and 21, you had that agreement. And you also got a certain amount of money put in warrant articles during that time. And that's too hard for me to figure out. I would have no way of knowing, how much that should be, that, we would go, which projects we would include, from past projects, and which ones we would exclude from past projects. And that's why when I wrote this, if that section stays in, then I would think that the easiest way to do it is to look forward and not backwards. All right, so any new projects that were added last year, which is the year we're considering for all the payments that would go to Woodsville, that would happen that way. But again, in the draft that I wrote of the bill, I left in the 50% based on the roads and 50% based on the assessment. But in my opinion, and I have not discussed that in detail with Senator Perkins Quokka yet, but in my opinion, it shouldn't be both. It should be one or the other. Okay. And that may fit into that middle ground where, you guys would like more money and you'd like to pay less. And both sides will be upset with me, but that's okay. That's probably where, I would need to be. But again, don't think that is, where we're going to go. One of the things that was in here was about unpaved roads. And certainly I know from being a city councilman in Rochester that your unpaved roads, you kind of got to run a grader down them, especially after mud season, and dump a whole bunch more stone in there, and grade that and all of that, in the springtime. And so that there is considerable amount of money. And if you're going to get away from that, you got to put it in a culvert somewhere. But it doesn't do you any good to put a culvert in if that's the low spot in the land around there. That mud season, when the ground is frozen and the top layer thaws and the bottom layer hasn't, the water sits in there and just makes mush out of that ground. And that's what mud season is. And when it finally warms up so that the water can percolate down through the soils, mud season goes away and we're going on about our business, and the school buses can finally get to picking up all the students. So I've been there. I mean, if, you want that kind of a distinction between paved roads and unpaved roads and what the cost is, I don't know how many, there's this 44 out of 78 or whatever it is. I'm just trying to do that by memory in Haverhill. And yours out of the 8, I don't know whether it's 50-50 or close to that. Which is.
They've got less than a mile from the Wester.
Right. Okay. So, that may certainly be one of the criteria that you guys want to look at, because they're, unpaved road is an unpaved road. And I think back, a little aside, my grandfather owned a farm in West Virginia, in the hills of West Virginia. And mud season or not, he was, that pedal was either all the way up or all the way down, in his truck. But that's neither here nor there. All right. So where we are right now, let's start with the Woodsville, because that's the stuff that was in Senator Perkins Quokka, then modified by me before I put out the bill. What are your Yeah, I'm good with that. And what am I? I can't live with that parts.
If I may, I, I'm pleased with the proposed changes. I think there's still a gap, but I think it's a compromise. Um, Having both the formulas in there for the highway, basically gets, based on the calculations we were doing the last time, would bring Woodsville about $158,000 towards roads. And last year, we spent 273,000 on roads. To me, that's a compromise. It's not all the way, but it gets us closer. The $10 to $11 a mile, that cost Havel to run roads, I do not believe there's any way possible that, they could take over the roads and do that for that. I think the DRA mentioned other cities and towns with higher cost per mile rates. Yes, Woodsville was in the top of that. But, a snowstorm alone takes 2 trucks, 3.5 hours to make a cycle through our 8 miles of roads, 1 mile per hour. And you have to hit the streets in both directions. And to think you could do it with one in 8 hours and have it still be snowing, and I'm just using that for an example, you couldn't do it. You'd have an ice pack that you wouldn't get rid of for 3 months. Our salt budget alone averages $30,000 a year. That doesn't go away whether Woodsville's doing it or the town of Haverhill's doing it. So if you just netted that out, it would only leave $50,000 in this formula to say that the town could do it for that. Wouldn't be possible. As for the fire department, Senator, you've said that the town shouldn't pay any more than what it would cost them to perform the same functions. And the last time here, the plan for Woodsville's fire department, should the town have that opportunity, would be to run it as it is. Same staff, same building, same vehicles. And the only difference I can see out of that would be a stipend for the chief that we spend $10,000 a year on. So when I net out this year's budget, and I say net out, I take out legal, because I hope that goes away, and I take out vehicle capital reserves, I have a $103,000 fire department budget. So if I take 10 off from that for the chief, I'm 93,000. Based on the funding formula that we have here, Woodsville would get about half of that. So again, a compromise. It's not all the way there, but it's it's moving closer. I think, it's really important that language today gets rid of any question marks on funding formulas or anything like that, because it has been a source of I'll say disagreement, to say it mildly, and we need to make sure it's crystal clear for whoever's going to read it to understand it.
Mhm.
And I worry about where we're going to get all the numbers that we can all agree on. And so
So in this, because I'm probably not going to do both. I'm probably not going to give you construction money and also give you 50% based on assessment. If I take one away, which one is the one that you give up?
Well, under the current version, we already gave up, so to speak, 50% of the road cost per road mile. So that was the intention, was to balance it out essentially. The cost per road mile, as Kevin was explaining, just isn't what it would actually cost to maintain Woodsville's roads, which was the goal, was our understanding. So we reduced that by 50%, and then we added in the 50% of the assessed values to get Woodsville a little bit more, but still not, really anywhere close to what it actually costs them each year to maintain the roads. So really, we wouldn't want to see either of those go, because it's intended to be
I
a
understand
balance.
you don't want to see either go. But if I take one, which one do I take?
I would have to crunch the numbers, but I'm assuming they would receive less from the cost per road mile calculation.
So again, just think about it. It's not the, I would see it as the cost per mile and say that the 50%. Okay, so you get 50%, 50%. On the other one, you get the cost per mile, and then you get the project money added in. Okay, again, think about that. Now we'll go to the other side and
Well,
say,
can I just add one thing, sorry,
Yes,
on
ma'am.
the language? So if we were gonna keep in the assessed valuation language, our one edit to the overall draft would be including in section, so under section 4,
page number, line number,
line number 7 on the second page.
line number 7, second page.
Sorry, line
Okay.
number 8.
Okay,
And adding after, well, sorry, yeah, line 7, adding after the end of line 7, what the fraction should be applied to. So that section describes the fraction, which is the assessed valuation of Woodsville compared to the town as a whole. But then it doesn't say what the fraction would be applied to in terms of a budget number. So, and that's actually what led to litigation in 2019.
what words?
We would add the language, the fraction, I have drafts of this. The fraction shall be applied to Haverhill's gross highway operating budget, including the cost items set forth in 1B
More
below.
than I can write right now, okay?
I can give you we have copies.
Just- If you have it and
Yeah,
you have enough copies,
I do.
please pass it out. If you don't have enough copies, we
Okay.
have
give them this one too.
the
So-
ability to make copies.
Okay. So one of those has it based on the gross operating budget for the present year, and then the other version has it applied to Haverhill's prior year expenditures reported to the DRA.
Okay,
And this is the other
Haverhill.
version. Sorry.
in the current proposal, what can you live with? What can't you live with?
This was a thing that was a lot, but again, we'd want to crunch the numbers, but, put your microphone on.
One of the things that I just wanted to point out, Kevin just mentioned, I don't remember what you just said exactly for the cost for your fire department. And
93,000 after he deducted the 10,000 from the chief salary.
93,000. And so
That's the second part.
And so the town of Haverhill's fire department costs like around 170,000, and that includes providing fire service for all of the town, less than 3 square miles of Woodsville, plus the town of Benton. The entire town of Benton, we provide fire service for them as well. I guess my concern is that
Time out there first. How do you charge Benton?
they pay a contract
So you
because they don't have a fire department.
you put it out for bid and then they pay based on the bid.
Well,
They put it out for bid and
It hasn't been bid out recently. I don't know if you've actually put Benton out to bid under
We
you.
don't put Benton out to bid. He's saying, would Benton put it out to bid?
Benton doesn't, no, we just
And so
negotiated directly
we've had
with
this
Benton.
contract since I became town
Okay.
manager with the
Yeah.
town of Benton. And so
but
they
see,
pay us
to
$10,000 a
me
year.
that's a wonderful opportunity
Mhm.
because if I'm doing the same thing with Woodsville, then I should talk about the cost that it takes, you know, that Benton pays you for the coverage and the cost that, but they do have the ladder truck, which if you were to take it over, you would need because of the buildings that are in Woodsville, et cetera, et cetera. But it's a point, you know, one of those comparison things that I would want to look at.
So Benton only pays us 10,000
Okay.
for the year.
And how big is Benton?
I don't even know the square mileage of Benton. The population is much smaller than the town of Haverhill. It's actually smaller than the district of Woodsville.
All right. Sorry to interrupt you, but
That's okay.
I wanted to.
And so I guess my concern is when we're talking, when we're listening to how much it costs per mile as an argument, or it costs the village of Woodsville to operate a highway department or a fire department, the numbers aren't always in line with what we've seen to provide that service throughout the towns. And so, though I understand that they produce a budget and they say it costs them a certain amount of money, they often will underrun those numbers. And when you have 8 miles of road and you're using $30,000 of salt and the town uses just about double that for much more road mileage, 26 miles of pavement.
Well, don't concern yourself too much about what Woodsville pays, you know, because I've tried to structure this more about what you pay for your stuff, okay? And even in his 90,000, you know, 93,000, you know, he recognized that the compensation that he would get maybe half of that, okay, or whatever. So again, we're looking at. We're not trying to make anybody, you know, the winner. We're trying to get to that compromise, that sweet spot in the middle that both of you say, yeah, I'm not all that happy with it, but
Well,
I think it's fair.
So what I was getting to though is that the town of Haverhill's highway department costs us about $740,000 a year. But as we put in this these talking points for today, what we've determined looking at the data is that a large portion of our highway budget is used to maintain gravel roads. And so if you're going to look apples to apples on cost, we should be looking at pavement to come up with an average price. And that would be complicated, but we could do it. And so to just take an average cost of what it costs to run our department to include 46 miles of gravel and 26 miles of pavement, or right around there, it's not apples to apples to say that we should just break all that into equal parts and then give Woodsville a certain percentage of that.
I think that, you know, it is fair. If I put in the construction projects, okay, for paving roads and stuff, and there is a significant difference in how much it's going to cost you to maintain paved versus that would all have to be in the mix at the same time. Okay?
Because what we were proposing was that if you're going to do a per mile average cost, that they would be taking capital improvement money out of that payment toward their capital improvement projects. You've kind of gone in that direction with 50%.
Again, you know, we're still looking at it, but if I only give them the cost per mile of what it costs you, the question is whether I put those paving projects in and how do I put them in to put, you know, if you were going to run a paving project that was going to cost you, you know, $4 million because it's one of the main roads that's not a state road, and you put it in this year, then their number bumps up. And that's why I was saying that it would be over the life of that road, you know, Instead, again, I'm trying to,
Yep.
trying to get there somewhere.
And
But-
so one of the other talking points we didn't put in here is that they currently, from what I understand, and Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, contract with the town of Bath to grade their gravel. And the town has a grader. So one of the talking points is just about capital assets, vehicles. And that one of the statements that you made at the last meeting was that you didn't want the people of Haverhill to have to pay more than they would if they maintained the 8 miles of Woodsville's roads. And so with regards to that, not buying duplicative equipment, we don't need, 2 loaders and 2, we don't need 2 of everything. And the people of Haverhill shouldn't have to pay for 2 of everything. But the town
Nothing
has a
in the
grader.
calculations that I'm doing were all based on what it costs you, not what it costs them.
Right. So one of the things that we wanted to bring up was that, because the town has a grader, we certainly could include, as part of the negotiating, so that they don't have to pay that cost to Bath, that would be some form of credit back to the town of Haverhill, and we would grade those, that mile of dirt. Something along those lines as part of the
So-
negotiating.
To say it a little differently, that for their 1 mile or whatever of gravel road, whether they borrowed your grader or whether you graded it for them or whatever, might be an area of compromise for the gravel road that you've got.
You wouldn't borrow it.
No, and we wouldn't have a grader operator, but I would think that would be the grader talk, because we haven't been able to talk about grader for 4 years. The grader talk would be something I would think we would put in that mutual agreement that you're talking about.
Fine
and
with me, yeah.
discuss it there and not in this discussion. I think this should be about how we built that number.
And see, to me, it could be part of how do I build that number? Because now if I'm only talking paved roads, okay, and Haverhill was going to do the grading, and supply the rock and all of that stuff for the unpaved road that you've got, then the calculation comes down to their 40 whatever miles, let's see, it was 40, so it'd be 30 something or 20 something
26 miles of pavement.
of pavement, vice your 7 miles of pavement, and we'd look at the numbers for that. I mean, I'm trying to make it easy. Well, good, my help is here. I didn't expect you for an hour yet, I guess. All right.
There's a visitor in town, so.
Oh, you wanted to get out of the way. All right. Just to catch you up,
Yes.
we went through, and if it wouldn't be too much trouble, I'm going to ask you to repeat just a little bit, okay, for Senator Perkins Cuoco so that you can hear it from your mouth. I opened up with asking Woodsville, in the way the amendment is written currently, what they could live with, what they couldn't live with. And I did mention that our conversation about not having both the 50% and the money for the projects was something that I had talked to you about. So again, let me catch you up so that,
All right, I'll try to do it again. Basically, I think the language as we were looking at this amendment this morning is a compromise. It's moved us closer to our number, albeit not anywhere near all the way there. My example basically is that I think it would net approximately $158,000 with the block grant money and the 2 calculations. Our expenditures were $273,000 for this past year, and I don't feel that there's any way that anyone can do these highway roads in Woodsville for $88,000 the one formula would suggest per mile. You know, we expend $30,000 in salt alone, $12,000 in diesel. And then we have labor, vehicle maintenance, and the list goes on. You know, and as for an example, even though there's only 8 miles, it takes 2 vehicles 3.5 hours to plow when they're plowing. And I don't think that could be left to one vehicle, you know, in 8 hours, especially with a snowstorm and, you know, ice buildup and so on and so forth. They'd never get caught up. You know, as for the fire department and the formula, you know, that's a compromise as well. I feel it gets us about halfway there to what the real cost of the fire department would be if Haverhill was doing it. Our budget this year is $103,000 when I take out legal fees and with some money for the capital reserve fund for, and out of that 103, if Haverhill's plan was to leave the vehicles there, use the barn, staff it the way it's staffing, the only difference would be the $10,000 that we're currently paying the fire chief. So that's how we get to $93,000. So.
And then the amendment that I just had Kevin hand you. So obviously we like the 50, we reduced the road cost per road mile to 50% and added in the assessed valuation, which gets to about, like Kevin said, 158,000, which is a little bit more than if you were to rely on just the road mileage formula. And then we just added in after on line 7 on the second page, what the fraction would be applied to if it's based on the assessed valuation. That's because the fraction is described and it describes, you know, Woodsville's percent of valuation compared to the town as a whole, but it doesn't describe what that fraction would be applied to. And we just put in, there's 2 versions. One has it applied to Haverhill's gross operating budget, and the other has it applied to its prior year expenditures that are reported to the DRA. So that just adds some clarity for that section. And then there's some other minor edits that we propose just for clarity.
Haverhill. We asked the same question, what they could live with, what they couldn't.
Well, and like I said, we're just barely seeing this now, so, I mean, it would have been
If
nice.
we had to choose, we would take out the assessed value, because you had asked which one we would take out.
And the fire, everything.
And the fire.
Anything about fire. But, I'm just reading this now, that they're going back to a per capita basis, so they're looking at doing it per person, instead of per square mile. And so I'd have to look at what those numbers are. We haven't run those numbers.
That wasn't just in our version. We only edited our version or in bold one.
I can say that I will, to take out the fire probably is not a starter with me. That I don't want you guys back here, okay? And since that was one of the 2 issues that was brought up at the public hearings, I would certainly lobby the good senator here, you know, very hard if she tried to take out any mention of the fire. I'm willing to get it to a number that, you know, is reasonable for both of you. But because it would be one of those things that you would come back to me with, and, you know, God love you, you know, you're nice people, but I don't want to see you again, you know? Unless I happen to vacation up in the Haverhill, Woodsville area, you know? So the one you would take out, and I did ask him, I said, you know, if you had to take out one, you know, either the road projects or the other, which one you would take out. So.
And if I could just, I ran a couple numbers, and if I can respond to that, we had done 50% of each to try to reach a balance point, but if you were gonna remove one or the other, then we would want the full cost per road mile versus, I mean, it shouldn't be 50% of that, because that would only be 5,000 per mile. So that's what we would prefer versus 50% of the assessed valuation, unless you were gonna go with the full assessed valuation, which is essentially what the prior formula was.
That's certainly, but in trying to do that, that's what got us back in 21. All right, from 19 to 21.
Well, the formula was in place from 2009 until it was contested in 2019, but it had worked for about 10 years up until that point.
All right, so now if you guys are still on the fence, but if we did go with the cost of what it would cost Haverhill to do the roads, then I still have the issue of paved versus unpaved. That, I don't know if you saw that email.
I don't know if I did put that in there.
Okay. But you can look at mine.
Who's this from?
No,
From Haverhill.
so I think in our talking points, what we were talking about, in terms of the paved versus unpaved, that if we were to use a per mileage rate, based on our operating budget, as Bridget said, a majority of our annual budget is gravel based. And just if we were to send it to them based on that, that they take a portion of whatever we send them every year and put it into a capital reserve fund to be saved for capital projects going forward.
And one of the things that I asked them to think about was Haverhill taking over the approximately 1 mile of gravel road maintenance, not the snow plowing of it, but the actual maintenance of the road, and then have the cost based on what it costs them for the paved roads, which is 8 miles or 7 miles out of the 8 miles that you have. So again, we haven't asked DRA any of the questions, and I don't remember whether I sent you a copy of the proposed amendment or not.
We're just seeing this proposed, the language that was provided this morning, as we're
Okay.
sitting here. Yeah, I guess I come to this from a slightly different perspective in terms of having studied the history of the relationship somewhat. And it was my understanding that the idea here was to have the two entities behave as though there was an actual Chapter 52 village district. And the baseline for an actual Chapter 52 village district is that whatever activities they conduct with their own funds. And funds that they raise from either enterprises that they conduct or they raise through taxation of the people who live there because they want some form of special services. That's essentially the nature of the beast of village districts. I also look at a slight, maybe a bit of an irony that we have an entity that was formed for the purpose, at least, in the 1800s, for running a fire department and has been referred to over the years as a fire district. And yet we're still talking about having the town pay for that. And so one idea that just crossed my head, and I haven't run this by the commissioner, but would be to, and I understand that there's a degree of entanglement and dependency, maybe codependency in this relationship. And the idea here is to try to get things to work smoother and perhaps disentangle them. And one idea would be to sunset some of these provisions and say, okay, we understand this is
there's a history and there's a sort of an expectation, have the funding, for example, for the fire department sunset in 2 years or 3 years or 5, whatever they want to agree to. But instead of having it be a permanent dependency, which I thought we're trying to get away from, have that be a sort of or maybe a declining and then sunset kind of a thing. Just some thoughts of mine.
Yeah, I would like to comment on that, okay? I understand that the fire district was established when neither of them had fire coverage, okay? And that Woodsville had fire coverage, formed the fire district. And at that time, Haverhill was not providing that service, so was not taxing any of the rest of Haverhill for fire service. But as soon as they got a fire department, okay, then the amount of money that they were raising for all of Haverhill is now a portion of that the people in Woodsville are paying for the Haverhill Fire Department, and the Haverhill people, unless there is some kind of a compensation, are not paying anything for the Woodsville one. And certainly if I go into this proposal that, I don't know whether you got a copy of this yet or not, but one of the things that they talk about, and that's one of the things that you and I discussed in my office at one point, was establishing a separate, what would we call it, enterprise district or whatever it is, and special assessment district where Haverhill and the rest of the village districts in Haverhill are in one special assessment. Woodsville is in the other, and that takes care of fire. Okay?
I think the town has.
You need to hit the button or you're.
The town seems to have at least outlined that as scenario number 2. And I'm not sure whether that's something that they would find acceptable or whether that's an example to show how it's going to work.
But as I remember our conversation, either in the office that day or soon afterward, you said that really wasn't what the district, special assessment districts were established for. But is it close enough?
Well, yeah, my research into special assessment districts pointed to a couple of different problems. One being that under the RSA for special assessment districts, you would also include all of the tax exempt property as essentially sharing the load. And I think if I'm not mistaken, there's something like $22 million worth of tax exempt property in Woodsville, which includes all of Woodsville's government operation buildings and schools and medical centers and all that stuff. So those exempt properties would then be getting a tax bill from the Woodsville district. And likewise, if there was a special district formed for the town of Haverhill, the churches and schools and the like, there would also bear part of that burden. So it was also my understanding that the special assessment districts were intended to be more or less for a project-specific thing that wasn't going to last indefinitely. It had sort of a trajectory that indicated that it would be paid for and accomplished in a certain number of years and not be an evergreen arrangement. But that's a little unclear. But so it didn't seem to me to be the best fit for this kind of a situation. And one of the things that I continue, that, from the DRA's perspective, what we've seen in the struggle between the two communities is a pretty profound lack of trust in the numbers. And when I look at the warrant articles that were put forward, those numbers bear scant resemblance to what is being talked about now. And so what I think we need to see is some way of reliable reporting between the, whatever the relationship is, there needs to be a place where they can be confident that the numbers that they're getting are realistic and true. And, you know, so Mr. Shelton says it costs $30,000 in salt, and I hear the town saying they don't believe that. And so somehow there should be built into this some way of neutralizing that the disputability of all the numbers that are being talked about and that they're going to put in front of each other over the years to come.
Along those lines, one of the things that we've heard pretty clearly from the select board and from residents is that if the town is going to transfer any amount of money to the fire district in the future, that the people of Haverhill and the select board would like there to be accountability. So with the transfer of money, there be some detailed reporting back from the fire district as to how they're spending those tax dollars. And that hasn't happened in the past. We get the summaries for the budget, for the town report, but we don't get the details.
All right. I'm going to put that one on hold for right now, okay? Because the last I knew, Woodsville had done their 22 audit. You guys were still pending your 22 audit. And what went on before that, I don't know, okay? So there is in the legislation that they are required, each of you are required to do your audits, okay? And those audits should take care of the things that you're talking about in there. So again, we'll put that one on hold for right now, okay? So first, I guess the question, because you've talked it up a special assessment district and they haven't talked to a special assessment district.
We didn't phrase it as a special assessment district, but one of the versions that we proposed at some point did have each entity essentially paying their own taxes for highway and fire. There was one version of the,
Sorry, pardon me, Chair. I mean, I guess I'm hearing the concerns about the special assessment district, but yeah, I guess I'd like to explore more fully this idea that like you guys just raise and spend your own funds, you know, I mean, it seems to be the pass-through, that's the issue.
yeah, so we had proposed a version that essentially exempted Woodsville from paying the highway and fire department related taxes to the town, and essentially they would just raise their own. So that was one of the versions we had proposed. I don't have copies right now.
But that would, again, from what we're talking about here, that would require all of your tax exempt properties to get a tax bill.
Why would that be, why couldn't it just be the 90 million that Woodsville's valuation is on and the 400 plus for the town? Why would we have to bring in the
If we
tax
did it,
exempt
Because that's what
properties?
the statute says.
Could it be changed?
It would, we are not going out and changing the statute on special assessment districts. If we were to do this so that you didn't have to tax your tax exempt properties, we would need to write a whole new section, and that's not happening. Not happening. Okay?
Well, I think when we looked at the idea of a special assessment district, which is scenario 2, you know, we tried to make it as simple as possible in the bullet points that you would determine what those 2 separate tax bases would be, which would be the Woodsville Fire District and the rest of the town of Haverhill, and then create them as separate highway districts. So from what I understand, we would have to create 2 highway districts. We would have the village district and you would have the highway district, because we're ultimately taxing them separately. From my perspective, if we had to include exempt properties, that would not be a problem on the town side. We have a lot of exempt properties as well.
Your churches are going to be happy?
Probably not, but we do have a number of let me put it this way, the population of Haverhill would be happy to see some of those larger parcels that are considered exempt, taxed for at least the highway and fire. That I think that they would actually not argue with that necessarily.
I think
would
that would probably
equal-
lead to litigation, just from a litigator's perspective.
Again, I see lots of problems there.
Yeah, and the statute also requires a really high degree of buy-in, democratic buy-in from the people affected by forming a special assessment district. And so to do that in Concord would be really contrary to what that statute is intended to accomplish.
Like I say, I personally don't see where either of you could really live with the statute the way it is right now. And that, like I say, unless Senator Perkins Cuoco wants to do it, I don't see us making a new statute just to be for you guys.
I don't want to make any statute, but I guess I just want to push like one question further on this, which is just that I guess I don't understand why we would change anything about the standard method of taxation. Like if we were to form a district that allowed them to raise and spend their own revenue, and Haverhill raise and spend revenue outside of Woodsville, why can't we keep intact the rules, existing rules around tax exempt entities? Like, I guess I understand you're raising and levying on a smaller assessment base, but that's just your standard assessment base. I mean, why are tax exempt entities part of the conversation? I guess I'm unclear on that.
As
So
part of the
help me
special
understand.
assessment.
That's what's in 52A. And so you'd have to, in addition to making modifications to 52 for purposes of forming Woodsville as a village district in these circumstances, you would then be looking to make modifications to 52A. I've also understand that, there's a sort of a larger question behind or beyond the two communities here, that there are 17 other village districts, in particular with respect to roads, that would love to have some sort of complicated sharing arrangement that allowed them, the village district with the roads, to get the town to start paying for their roads. So the more broadly I think that the legislation starts to go, the more it's going to draw the other interested communities into seeking similar arrangements, which gets real complicated real fast.
No, you and I are of the same mind on that exact point. I guess I may not be phrasing my question clearly. My question, I guess, simply stated is, why doesn't the existing statute work? Like, why, is there anything that's democratically preventing Woodsville from forming its own special assessment district other than a ballot question that you're aware of?
Legally, no, I don't suppose there is. If they went through the steps in 52A, but then they would be looking at taxing government buildings, schools, and
And
charitable
that's just
organizations.
because of how the existing 52A functions. It,
Correct.
for some reason, is written to place an assessment on tax exempt entities, whereas our normal system of taxation would not assess or levy taxes against those.
Correct.
Okay.
And
That's
so,
the
yeah,
link I was missing, and.
Yeah, the
so,
comment
okay.
about that, yeah, your churches would not be happy to hear about that. We've
No.
seen that experience where
I see that.
charitable organizations find that they're not necessarily entitled to institutional exemptions because they're members only kind of places. There's been some disputes that the DRA has had to, that's been involved in with the Board of Tax and Land Appeals. And they're very unhappy when they get a tax bill for
Yeah,
something.
I
when
wonder
they-
why we wrote it that way. Well,
Yeah.
there's probably a lot of history to that we don't need to go into today, but okay.
I
Thank
mean,
you
it just-
for helping me on. I just want
Yeah.
to understand where we were. On that.
And that's why I think 52A, and I did a pretty deep dive into the legislative history of it, was
Yeah.
designed to deal with sort of capital intensive projects that would benefit a specific, I think
like
they
a
used the
TIF
word
district.
peculiar
Okay.
population. And so that they would all be willing to do it because they were going to benefit peculiarly from it, not in a negative way, but in a good way. And so, you know, even the church would be willing to pay for it because it was going to be good for them. And that's, I think that was the concept.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair, for humoring me. I just, that, something I wanted to
We're co-chairs
understand.
on this because it's only the two of us.
Okay,
Question. Certainly going back to the formula that was invoked 2009, you know, was still in the 19 thing. What percentage would I have to have to only pay for those things? Percentage for the roads and a percentage for fire? Because that agreement would be very easy to write, you know, instead of, you know,
That actually was the point of the 2009 legislation, and there was a memorandum of understanding between Haverhill and Woodsville, and that was based on the assessed valuation because the idea was Woodsville was getting back the amount that it was contributing in taxes to Haverhill. So that basically accomplished scenario number 2 in terms of returning Woodsville's own tax revenue to Woodsville,
yeah,
But
but then.
that's not what happened.
and it was
Whoa, whoa,
around
whoa, 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 hold
it
on
was
a
around
second.
22 to 27%.
In that, Haverhill is providing some services, okay? And so, you know, so we'll stop there and then I'll turn back over to you guys.
Yeah, so
You turned it off instead of on.
Yeah, we discussed that at the last meeting, and we provided the spreadsheet where we did the financial analysis on the previous formula. And the problem with that is that the District of Woodsville was not paying their fair share of the cost for all the other services the town provides. So recreation, tax collection, assessing, police department, welfare.
So the question comes down to
They were taxed just like everybody else in Haverhill.
if I'm only looking at providing for the roads and I'm providing, you know, what they're being taxed for the roads and what they would be taxed for the fire, then what would that percentage be?
I don't know what the percentage is right offhand. I'd have to go back and find that
That's-
spreadsheet.
that's-
However,
And what we're gonna do,
that's why we talked about the gross versus net. That's the basis of that discussion, is that if the Woodsville Fire District just wants the taxes back that they paid for fire and highway, we determined what that cost was, or what those taxes were. And those taxes were significantly less than what the town was giving them back. And so when the town gave them back the 28% based on gross, they were basically not contributing to any other services that the town provides.
again, I'm not trying to do that, okay? But if I'm really trying to get you to a place where this thing is easy to calculate, you know, and, you know, if you, we now know what you think the number is for maintaining the roads. Is that correct? In Haverhill?
What we pay gross
Yeah,
to
well,
maintain the highways is what we provided.
Okay, so
So if you just
that
take the
number,
budget and
that
divide it,
number is what?
it's around $11,000 a mile.
11,000 a month. So that would mean that you guys would get 88. Right?
no, well, no, it's not. It's less. It's like 8,000 a mile.
No, what I was saying was if you just
If we
take,
if we take gross, but gross isn't the figure. We should be talking net.
I think you should be talking gross because
think
then we're
you
going to
should
have a
be
separate discussion on the amount of money that comes in.
And that's why one of the fraction
I-
values we put in here is based on the prior year expenditures
So,
that gets reported to the DRA.
If I say 88,000 to maintain the roads, then And I don't know that that contains any real project money for repaving roads. Right?
It does not. It does not.
Okay, so part of this, how much, if I do this based on a percentage of the assessed value, what is that $88,000? How many percent is that?
Can you figure that out, Jennifer, real quick?
Their percentage of assessed value, using 23 figures, is 22.67%.
Understand that?
I'm
But-
trying to use your formula, Chair. I'm so used to talking about stuff like this by being like, it's 8 cents out of every dollar raised or something like that. The percentage is throwing me off, but I'm sticking with you.
We can do it in that terms. I just want to know
Right. Some numbers.
if I'm really trying to get this, and the formula did work for a while, but okay, the question as to whether or not it was fair or not. So what is fair is, at least one of the talking points that we ought to have is, it would be, the formula that was used was what, 20%?
It was 20% from 1990 until 2008 when the compromise was reached, and that's because the 20% wasn't what Woodsville was actually contributing. So then it changed to the formula based on assessed valuation in 2009.
And that would give me a number, okay? 20% of the assessed valuation, what does 20% come out to? It comes out to,
I don't know right offhand.
Well, it depends what you're
What
applying
are we
it to.
applying
The
it to?
gross highway operating budget.
to the assess, no, well, first of all, I was gonna do it to the way the formula was.
That
Okay.
applied the percentage amount to the gross highway operating budget for Haverhill.
And so what would that be based on how it was done from 2009 to 2019?
I think you got
What
about
would it be?
200,000 a year.
It changed every year. And so some years it was 220,000, sometimes it was almost 500,000 that it resulted in.
Okay?
Depending on
Woodsville Fire
Haverhill's
District.
budget. And
So if we had a.
So the mathematician in me says, all right, we go figure out what the average is.
But that was based on them getting, some years, 28% of a capital project. So if we had a $1 million capital improvement project, we would automatically have to tack
Understand.
on 28%
Understand?
to transfer to the Woodsville Fire District just because.
Understand?
And that's where the disparity came in. And people were paying 128% or 122% for every vehicle, 120%, 128% for every expenditure. And so if the people of Haverhill wanted to spend $500,000 on their roads one year, they had to immediately tack on another 20 to 28%, depending on the year. It
All right. It
Well,
sounds
that-
like it's getting
Woodsville was getting
too
back what it
complicated.
contributed.
Well, I'm not feeling like any of these numbers are actually, I mean, even the way this is written, how are we capturing either depreciation or capital expenditure? Because, I mean, in my opinion, Senator Gray is right. Like, if we averaged out the budget over all those years, sounds like that would include some of the capital funds. Or we could just do some straight line depreciation on roads. I mean, at some point, we have to, there's a capital piece to this that's significant, so that has to be part of the calculation. Right?
Yeah. I mean, there's even that, you could go out and pick a number and then say that based on consumer price index, that number would inflate, year to year to year. And put that in the legislation. I mean, there's all kinds of options open to you. But I also want to keep it as simple as I can.
The only one in here that's ambiguous to me is depreciation of equipment. I think everything else is pretty well spelled out in terms of what it would include and how it would apply.
don't you, in your calculations, don't you depreciate your equipment over the years?
I just don't know where that's factored into the budget, I guess.
I think it's separate line items, isn't it? DRA? Do you guys know?
The depreciation is done on the financial statements,
I think it's,
but the expenses would be recorded under the capital outlay.
and the depreciation for each item has to be calculated and summed up for the departments and then put on the thing. So I think it's, you know,
But I struggle to find where we should even be including capital assets, because the people of Haverhill have a highway department with all of the necessary equipment. So,
and the question is not how much theirs doing, but how much are you spending on that? You can't do your roads unless you got 44 miles of gravel. You can't do it without a grader. Okay? So, that grader, I don't want you to have to put in to any formula the cost, $250,000 for cost of a new grader in any 1 year. I don't want you to have to put in $3 million because you're doing a major paving project. I don't want to have to put in, what I want to put in is a depreciated cost. And that grader is going to last for, 25 years. So it's 1/25 of the cost of that grader goes in for figuring straight line depreciation, over the 25 years, and figuring that road project, that if it's, in a cul-de-sac somewhere, that you have to pay because you accepted it, that's going to last for 30 years. But if it's a main road, not a state road, you may need to repave that every 7 years. Okay. So that's, if we're figuring out what the cost is, yes, the cost of labor, the cost of materials, but that equipment, there's a cost to it. And that cost, to even it out so that you don't get hit with high bills, that's why I went to a depreciation.
And that's what you have in lines 12 to 16, it looks like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, I said when I retired from being an engineer, I was either going to go study and take the accountant's exam, or I was going to teach in some school somewhere. So I ended up substitute teaching, and I was doing taxes for AARP, the tax program. So I did them both, but just not for money. So,
You have a unique set of expertise.
So to capture that, then it's the depreciation schedule related to the highway department, period.
well, again, if they have something unique, and it's not involved in the highway, then that would not be part of the
Right.
calculation. And again, it's not your cost because
Understood.
it's what it would cost them. Like, I think you're real close on the fire department. It sounded like, at least at the last meeting, that you were very much considering accepting their offer, but again, that has to go through the bailiwicks first. When you get a green light flashing, that means we've got too many mics on at one time.
Yeah, again, it was something I was going to lug back, and in fairness to the voters, they didn't accept that, when it was put on the ballot. But again, we hope after we get through town meetings that we can have these discussions. And
Was it actually on the ballot? I didn't know whether you actually voted on it or not voted on it.
I think it was back, I think in 20,
But the presentations that you were just doing were a year or two ago, right? And so it would have been on your ballot in 21.
We were in 20.
Okay, but how about the other village districts? So was yours on about that same time?
I think it was 20, but that was the year, I had just started, but our district meeting didn't get held until almost June that year because of COVID.
Yeah.
So,
But it's in the Haverhill, it's in the Haverhill Town reports, the warrant articles for all the districts, and I went back and checked and I did see it. It was Article 10. I just can't remember the year, but I think it was 2020.
To answer the question you raised a few minutes ago, what do we know about depreciation? And the MS1s do not appear, and the accompanying schedules don't appear to include depreciation.
How about the MS 550, whatever, the background stuff?
Yeah, the 535 doesn't have it either. There's no specific line for depreciation of, vehicles or anything like that.
That's what I meant by
When you do you guys do a financial standing report? Because you would have the cost, the asset value, and that asset value would be the undepreciated value of any asset you own.
We get an audit report, but on a delayed calendar.
Yeah.
And it's probably included in there, but that's not information that we use in setting tax rates. Yeah, the tax rate process is, the reporting that we get, and he can kick me if I'm misstating it, is all
I
the
can
focus.
see your feet, so if he does kick you, I'll yell at him.
He's got a switchblade he's poking me with. So the reporting is for purposes of is for purposes of setting tax rates, and we look almost entirely at appropriations, and so there wouldn't necessarily be an appropriation for depreciation,
Right, there
or even
wouldn't.
for capital expense. That would be in somewhere else.
The
right?
balance sheet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But do you guys do a balance sheet?
And they, through our system, we can bring balance sheets, but it be included in our audits and our financial statements.
So is it a number that you can produce and that you can review?
it is, but just an on-time audit, our auditors, they're not beginning 23 until June. And, that's for last year and hope to complete by September. So that number, if you're waiting for the audit, is going to be, well after the year started and the budget process is already complete.
And that's why I've geared everything to the year before. And you also have a 3-month kicker in there because your fiscal year starts in January. You don't have your town meeting until, so it would be a year and 3 months afterward when we were finalizing the number for the next town meeting, right?
But you
No.
do calculate your depreciation as soon as you purchase a piece of equipment, because you know how many years you're gonna depreciate it on. And then you're going to have your purchase price.
I absolutely believe that, but, they have to be able to verify what you paid for that new 10-yard dump,
Yeah.
And I'm good to go there. So it sounds like right now, if we go for the cost of roads and the cost of roads including depreciation, first line supervisors, all the stuff that's in there, the question next is, do I look back or do I look forward? You would want to look back you wouldn't want to look forward. What do I do?
I guess
DRA.
My question is a little bit different in that, talking about depreciation as a tax recovery method is not, that's an apples and oranges type of thing to do. So if you're trying to compensate Woodsville for the amount that it pays in taxes to Haverhill, to include depreciation, it includes something that wouldn't, I don't think, he knows more about numbers than I do, wouldn't be normally covered under taxation.
Well, I'm trying to get around having the full cost of the new whatever it is, put into the bill for any particular year.
Yeah,
And
and,
trying to average it out.
and the way that communities typically pay for large capital expenses is they reserve and they have an appropriation in each year's budget for contributions to the capital reserve fund to replace whatever it is that they need to replace. And, so I don't know how you work
I
that
would
into this.
disagree with that some, because certainly some communities do have a reserve fund. Some have, just put it in an unassigned fund balance, and some bond the stuff. And so the bonding, wouldn't cause me a problem, because that would be distributed over the year, and I wouldn't have to use the full price of the equipment. I'd use the price that that of my bonding payment. And if I'm looking at a fund, that doesn't bother me either, because then it would be how much went into that fund. All right. The problem comes when I'm paying cash. Like in the case of Woodsville, last year, they used unassigned fund balance to get their tax rate down from 8 whatever down to 4 whatever. And if they were cash wealthy at some point and used that to pay for the roads, then I don't want that number, the full number, going into the calculation to bump it up. So they have an added expense, like they said before, where they're paying X plus, 10 or whatever percent extra because of that kind of thing. I'm trying to walk that line down the middle, and I'm not getting there.
So we've actually purchased vehicles in all of those ways in the last 4 years. So we've, done direct purchases where we've, put the total amount into a warrant article and asked the people to buy a vehicle. We do lease purchase agreements where we have payments over 2 to 5 years. We have used fund balance, so to make direct purchases for vehicles, and then we do have a couple different capital reserves for vehicles. So I guess we really should kind of dig into the details as to, if we're talking about capital assets and depreciation, what exactly are we going to be applying that to?
It may be something that's, I can't get there, by doing it. But you had all those same problems, and that, back in 9 to 19, and I guess all the way to 21, that there was a calculation. Okay.
And I would just, when we talk about the formula that was established in 2009 or so, the statement that Lynette made that worked is not shared by the majority of people in Haverhill, and certainly not select boards of the last 5 years. So I just want to be careful that we're not reverting back to something that most people think is inequitable.
Again, that's part of the reason why I went to the thing about how much does it cost to maintain the roads, and how many percent of maintaining the roads would get me to that 88 number that you said. And so that the 20% may not be the right percentage. And certainly I would like, if I'm going there saying it's X percent for the roads, then I also have to say it's X% of something else for the fire department. Because the fire department, unless, Senator Perkins Coco overrules me, the fire department is gonna go in here. You're gonna have something. It may not be what you guys decide. Senator Perkins Coca may come to my office, or I may go to hers, and whatever we write is gonna go in front of the committee. So,
Well, just taking the 88,000 to what was spent last year for the town of Haverhill. And again, I don't know that has depreciation in it and all those other things. So, but that's 11.8%. And I would say it doesn't have all of those added costs that you've mentioned, but,
So I'm just looking at the 2024 proposed operating budget, and it does have numbers going back to 2022 and 23 that include capital reserves for vehicles, fire vehicles, highway purchase for trailer. It seems like those numbers are they're warrant article based numbers that are in the operating
you're
budget.
looking at Haverhill's budget, or
Yeah.
you look, okay.
So it
So
does
what's
seem
the
like,
number? What's the number you came up with?
well, I don't have a specific number, but I mean, I'm just saying it's captured in the operating budget for Haverhill.
Mhm.
So, and it sounded like they capture depreciation and capital.
Warrant articles
capital.
aren't part of an operating budget.
Well, I'm just saying they're in here. So, I mean, it's just clearly something that's capable of calculation in connection with applying the formula as it's written in your version of the bill. So I think, I think it seems like those capital projects could easily be included in the calculation.
And
There's a difference between capital projects and capital assets, though, so we need to be clear there too. It's,
And again, when I wrote this, I always went to the prior year. Okay? So that, we had something to deal with.
I definitely think using actuals from the prior year is the way to, I mean, if you're gonna try to determine a number, you want to go off what actually was spent in the prior year instead of what you think you might spend in the coming year. It's a more definite number for all intents and purposes.
If I wanted audited numbers, I'd probably have to go back 2 years. Wouldn't I?
Yeah,
It sounds like we may want an average. Sorry, pardon me. It sounds like we may want some average concept because there are different capital expenditures in different years, but I unfortunately have to depart again, so I have to leave that with you, but
Okay.
I've agreed
Are
with
you coming
everything
back
you've said.
later? Or?
I will if I can. Are you planning to be here?
I have 2 prime bills, and with the house, you never know. So probably about 125 plus. I have to turn into a pumpkin. Okay.
Sorry not to be able to join you for longer today, folks.
All right.
thank you though, thank you.
Yeah. We can talk after.
We will
So if we can
definitely.
maybe move away from the percentage and for just a minute, there's a few other things that concern me that I'd like to bring up.
Yes, ma'am.
When you talk about the highway block grant,
Yeah.
and the words proportionate share has caused a lot of heartburn because it's an ambiguous proportionate. What's that referencing?
I'm
So-
using. I would use the definition that's in the highway block grant, where
And
it
that-
says 50% based on roads and 50% based on population, right?
So if we can alter 19 and 20, 21 to state that, that the village, if you're gonna go that route and you're gonna give a share of the highway block grant to the Woodsville Fire District, I would say based on it, and your idea is to do it based on the formula of the state to just
Which line are you on page?
19, page 2, 19, 20, 21. And just be super clear that instead of proportionate share, that your proposal is to have the village district receive a portion of the highway block grant based on the same formula that the state uses. And that's going to be as clear as day. There's no
We're fine with that. That makes sense.
messing with that.
We could just strike the word proportionate. Because it does seem clear it's gonna be based on the state formula.
And instead of population and road mileage of the district compared to the population, I mean, there's an actual like defined formula, and we might as well just reference it. It's easy to follow, and if it changes at the state level, it will change without us having to come back.
How about if I just put in CRSA,
Perfect. Or whatever the the highway block grant.
that's,
That way it's clear. No more ambiguous.
so I just taken out the word proportionate, and I'm gonna put to see the RSA
For highway block
at
grant.
the end of it.
And that way, if for some reason the state changes the calculation,
It just automatically
it just
happens.
would automatically.
Because it's gonna happen for the town, and then it'll just transfer over to the district without having to try to figure out what to do.
I'll go look up the
Makes sense
RSA,
to us.
unless you guys have it right there.
And then if we can go to 28, 29, 30, 31, we would prefer to use square mile than per capita.
And I think you're the other way.
Yeah, they are. Because it would result in I don't know how much higher payment, but I would assume a much higher payment for fire service.
Well, and our logic is that any person can call a fire department at any time, so it should be based on the amount of population, and that's exactly how Woodsville's contracts work for ambulance services. It's based on a per capita. Sorry, go ahead.
I think the formula is spelled out in RSA 235:23.
So in 28 through 32, how do I split the,
In terms of fire, we're at 0, and they're at per capita.
zero's not an option. It's gonna be in here, okay? Okay? And if you don't want it to be in here, sign an agreement, and this all goes away. So,
But I think that's the logic behind why we wish to exclude it, is because we've voted to accept them, and they're choosing not to come on board.
but you're taxing them. Okay? They are paying taxes based on your cost.
And that's their choice.
Understand? It's their choice.
Mhm.
But
The-
I'm trying to reach what I think is fair and
Right.
get the legislature to agree with me. So if I get there,
Yeah.
you know,
And that's why we feel we're compromising with square mileage.
and so what do the numbers work out to? If you're asking for square miles, what is your number in square miles come out, and what is our vice versa? You're the per capita one. What's your number? What's that come out to for last year? And you're in square miles. What's your number come out to?
Well, I think it was rough in the mid-40s, sir. I think that was,
Let's. She's hitting the numbers in the calculator, so let's let her do it, and let's let you guys do it.
What's that?
Their square mileage.
53 square
per
miles.
square mile, I had figured 3.5%.
Outside of Woodsville.
53 square miles total.
50
I
total.
actually this time I'm looking for a number,
So
a dollar.
I have $10,075 per square mile. If we did it by the square mile.
10,075 per mile.
178,000 for fire.
And you got 3 square
Last
miles?
year, we were only 137.
What's that?
68.
Okay, you have
1.8.
You have the number in front of you.
1.8 square miles?
Three square miles. We have 53 square miles in
52.4.
town. 3 square miles in Woodsville.
52.4 in town and 3 in Woodsville.
It just said 1.8.
Yes, sir.
What was our budget?
That's 18,135.
$2,072.75.
1152. 4582.
No. Jennifer, fire budget's 175.
Huh?
Fire budget.
I want to get this down to,
No, fire budget.
you know, if I'm only talking, you know, $1,000,
about last year?
then
Yeah, let's talk about last
I
year,
don't see what the-
137,468. That's what,
So you're looking at actuals. You're looking at the actuals.
no, I'm looking at the appropriations.
That doesn't match
I
the
figure by
report.
square mile, we're,
Huh?
by April's budget for fire department this year, Woodsville will get $6,200 per square mile.
Right, so that's 18,000.
The 232.
No, that's total, based on, it'd be 3.5% of their budget,
232,
178,000.
Would you times that by?
No. No, our square miles are 3.5% of the towns.
We have 137.
Well, then, like I pointed out, the population density in Woodsville is like over 700 people per square mile, whereas in Haverhill, it's around 90. So I mean, that's why we went with per capita, because the population density is just so different. So you are comparing apples and oranges in terms of density per square mile. And any of those people
So
can call
with-
the fire department.
and
But again, with a fire call, Haverhill responds to Woodsville, Woodsville responds to Haverhill.
and that's part of the agreements that they sign. And so if I say 50% based on per square mile and 50% based on per capita, that gets me pretty close to a mid number. If 18 is right and 33 is right, it gets me very close to the middle.
But again, I thought the idea was to compensate Woodsville for what it would actually cost the town to
Mm-mm.
cover that
No.
fire area.
No.
So I
It's what
think,
it would cost Haverhill to cover that area.
Right, which according to their plan was going to be about $93,000 per year, because they said they were only going to be removing the fire chief.
no, all the costs would be consolidated. And so I don't think the 93,000 would be, you know, but
Then, so the plan wasn't then to, if the
we would
Woodsville
come up with
voters,
our own budgeted numbers.
so, but there wouldn't be a truck or station in Woodsville then,
That's not
staffed with the same
necessarily
people?
true. I'm just saying that when we consolidated North Haverhill and Haverhill Corners fire stations under the Department of the Town, we were able to shave $275,000 off the combined budget. So if we had when we took those two budgets that they said they were spending on those two fire stations and to provide fire service for the town into one department, we were able to cut the budget collectively $275,000. So we would expect that we would be able to do the same thing if we consolidated the Woodsville Fire District's fire service under the blanket of the town, just through a common economy of scale. We were able to reduce all sorts of extraneous costs and eliminate costs that would be duplicated. And so it would be more than just fire chief.
And I,
Okay, so let's just, quick math, okay? You said there would be a captain and how many lieutenants?
I don't know, I'd have to go back and look at the org chart that the committee established.
All right, if we were to say one captain, two lieutenants, How many firemen do you usually have per? There's 18 fire, is that including the captain and lieutenants? 18 people. And if I say, again, just quick math, 100,000 feet, or, yeah, probably 100,000 once I put in turnout gear and the other stuff that it costs. And Benny's.
There's
no
nobody
benefits.
full-time, so there's no
So to me-
benefit, so it's just social security and Medicare that are the benefits, but
All right, so if you're at 93, you're, you know, that's about half, so it's about $50,000 per person.
for what? So I'm
For
not
a
following
year.
that.
You're 18 people. To get to a budget, if it's just a personnel budget for N93, or is that all in with hoses? and
That's
turnout?
all in except for buying vehicles and replacing them
Okay.
and paying rent or whatever on space. It's basically living the way we're living there currently. And I don't see how, if that is anyone's plan, to service the Woodsville district, that it could be done for any less.
And our department includes over
How many?
60 firefighters,
How many?
over 60. I don't have an exact number.
All right, so we got 60 for how many square miles?
That would be 50 square miles, plus Benton.
And sixty people. And you're at 100,000. And you're 1.8 square miles and you're 18 people. Right?
I know it's 1.8 square miles, but the fire department covers mutual aid, just like Haverhill covers mutual aid
Understand.
does.
Understand?
So if you're including Benton, Benton is 48.5 square miles, and they have 364 residents.
Certainly on this one, because your population is much more dense, all right. I think this one here is, unless we can figure out different ways, it's gonna be whatever Senator Perkins Cook and I come up with.
So what if we based it on calls instead of population? We could get that from the dispatch and sugar it down to,
I don't know that that is reflective.
because or we could do it by structures. Woodsville has 599 structures, North Haverhill has 1,051 structures, and Haverhill Corner has 527 structures. I mean, there are a number of ways we could try.
I
And-
think you have to stay away from the population and the density, because some of the things that we've heard, and I don't want to go into the weeds, is that 90% of our police budget is spent in Woodsville because of that same reason. So we've already had people asking us, well, why doesn't Woodsville pay their fair share of our police budget? So,
They're taxed to pay it just like everybody else is.
So I think we need to,
Hey, I would like their, for Haverhill to take over both the fire and the roads. Certainly, that would be my preference. But that's not what the people in Woodsville want to do. And so the question is that if you're going to tax them for services that they're providing themselves, should there, and the answer for a lot of years is yes, there should be some compensation based on the taxes that they've been paying. Okay, and I understand that that's how we got to a formula based on assessed value. But, this, certainly when I talk about recreation, and I talk about other things that's provided to the whole city, or excuse me, the whole town, and I'm good with that, all right? But when I get to things like the fire department, the roads, I don't know the roads in Woodsville, but it would be interesting for me to go and find out in Rochester how long an average route is for Rochester plows. Because I got a feeling that, that there must be doing between 20 and 25 miles of mixed roads in a 3-hour period with one truck. And to go, that it takes me 2 trucks, 3 hours to do. Of course, you got the plowing, then you got the pushback of the snowbanks. Later, you got all that other stuff. But each of you have developed a culture, okay, of how you do things, and as much as I can try. Time is running short because this thing does have to get into the committee and it has to get out. So. All right. I imagine none of you have had any lunch. And I may, depending on how the hearings are going upstairs, I may have to go at any time after 1:30 or 1:25.
So what do you want from us? What would be helpful for you?
I've listened to all your arguments. And I guess I'm back to what I wrote here in this amendment, and either taking out the 50% thing or taking out the project stuff. And probably it's easier to word if I take out the project stuff than if I do the 50% of the assessed value.
So will there be anywhere in here, if we're going to be doing these calculations based on budget, is there going to be a clarification of exactly what we're talking about when we say budget?
Well, that's certainly what I attempted to do when I talked about what would go in there.
Because one of the points of contention from the past is that we talked about numerators and denominators, we talked about budgets, but it wasn't clear enough to identify exactly what that starting point would be with regards to the highway department's budget. So if we're talking about budget, I would prefer the budget be just the operational budget to include staff even if you want to include fully loaded rate of staff. Because the wage line is not a fully loaded rate because of the healthcare thing that we were talking about. We can add that back in. So if we're talking about the operational budget, we're not talking about capital expenditures, capital projects, capital reserves, lease payments, debt service. We're not talking about all of that. We're talking about the day-to-day maintenance operational budget of the highway department, the fire department.
You can both send me whatever language that you
Okay,
want to see and
okay,
send it to me and Senator Perkins Coca.
okay.
I don't know that I've got time to hold any more meetings with you. And again, I don't want this to be the final. I want this to be something that eventually you guys can sit down together and use the change to 52B where you're going to go sign an agreement based on any of the criteria that you're formed under, and use 53, which allows you to do those agreements. 53A, I guess it is, whatever it is, to come up with your own. But I don't see that happening right now.
We, just for everyone's information, we have been in communication with the Woodsville Fire District. Kevin and I have been emailing, and chair of the select board has been involved in that. And the Woodsville Fire District will be coming to meet with the select board to begin discussions on what we believe what a merger might look like in the future for highway and or fire, and what steps we can take to move in that direction. So I think I'm not stepping out of line when I say that the current select board intends to pursue that, and whatever ends up in the legislation will be what we follow until there's a merger.
And right now, I'm certainly leaning to 50% based on per capita and 50% per mile, square mile, to get us to a number. But
So we'll send you our thoughts. That's all the correspondence regarding the meetings, which might be what Kevin just handed out. Well, thank you for giving us all the time that you've given us, because this is further than we've been able to get in 4.5 years.
just
so.
think how much, I get paid per hour.
Makes sense?
You know? I don't know, if I got paid straight time, you figure 2,080 hours in a year, and I get 100. So even if I was only paid straight time wages, it'd be about a nickel. So isn't well, when I say that she's the boss is the one that always gets paid more, right? So if you base it on that, that's how it is. I was telling the school group this morning, that, with the way inflation is, if you buy a Big Mac Happy Meal or Big Mac, combo meal, that was, well, but, when you pay for those, and if I use my legislative salary, I can probably get 5 in a year, so. But that's neither here nor there. All right, last comments. I think you've got some basis, and, with a few tweaks in here, it's at least a position. And if for some reason there is disagreements about how that calculation is done, certainly an agreement between you that says, yes, we're going to do this, that, or the other thing. We're going to follow this will be in chapter law, this part. We're going to follow the chapter law, but we're going to modify the formula to say this, or we're going to include this or that. Or even if you got to come back and see me or whomever next time, would have to win an election to be there. But, we're going to try to get you there. We're going to try to do what we can. And again, this will have a hearing, or I should say this will be discussed because it's already had a hearing. So everything we're doing is germane. And then it'll have another hearing over in the House. And the House people, Municipal Affairs Committee over there will have their own opinion on what. And so certainly the both of you can lobby them. The both of you can work on common language between now and then. I will encourage them, even if you are close on the fire, is to put something in here, even if it's the agreement that you say, because the two issues that you brought up time and time again, that you've been here, have been both the fire and the transportation. But any last words?
No,
Okay,
just thank you.
Yes,
thank you all for coming.